On the last episode of Menace, the Ken story. I turned 18 in July, and life was good. All of the bills were caught up in the house. Ma was working full-time, so I assumed she wasn't making drops for Rob anymore. I was making good money and putting some away. Me and Shalonda were doing our thing, and I had leveled up with her. By that point in time, we had far surpassed the Wednesday thing. I basically come to her window whenever I wanted, and she let me in. I felt like I had everything that I wanted, but things were about to blow up. Big time. It was August, and I was out doing my regular thing, driving and such. It was around 6:30, and I realized that I hadn't eaten anything since earlier in the day. I decided to stop by a fast food restaurant to grab something. I ordered my food, then made my way through the line. Just as I was about to exit the parking lot, I noticed a heavy police presence to my left. For the most part, I had a tendency to mind my business when it came to the police. If they weren't messing with me, I definitely wasn't looking for them. But it was unavoidable in that case. I looked over and realized that it was Ma's car. The whole scene was chaotic, so I couldn't really see what was going on, but it was definitely her car. I thought to myself, what you gonna do? What you gonna do? I had a few bags of weed and some cocaine in the car. I parked around the corner, locked the doors, then walked back to the restaurant. By the time I got back, everything was in an uproar. I passed Pops in the back of one of the police cars. Ma was standing outside. She was in handcuffs, and I could hear her yelling and crying. I ran towards her saying, "Hey, what y'all doing? Take them cuffs off of my mama." Ma turned towards me a little, and I could see that her face was all bloody. Between sobs, she said, "I'm so sorry you had to see this, Kenny baby." I rushed towards the officers. "Yo, what y'all do to her?" By that point, I saw a familiar face walking towards me. It was the officer that had stopped me that night when I got caught driving with my learner's permit. The same officer who had showed up after Kenny got killed. He was a young black guy. I got the feeling that he understood me and he wanted to intervene before things went too far. He signaled for the other officers to step back. "I got it," he said. The officer asked me to step over to his car. He explained that Ma and Pops had been involved in a heated argument which had escalated into an actual fist fight. When the police showed up, Ma and Pops got out of the car. They continued to push each other around, and even though no one saw where it came from, a bag of crack fell onto the ground. Upon searching the car, the officers found more. "They're both going to jail," he said. Hearing the story, I felt like I knew what was going on. I told the officer, "Look, I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but this is easy." It was his. The officer looked at me, and I could tell that he didn't want to say what he was about to say. He put his hands on my shoulder and said, "We found some on your father, but we also found some in your mother's purse." In my mind, that was easy too. She was making drops for Rob, but I couldn't say that, of course. "What I gotta do?" I asked. The officer asked how old I was. 18, I said. He told me to come down to the police station and he'd let me know if they could be bonded out. In my mind, all of that was easy too. Pops was a convicted felon and the aggressor in the fight against Ma. Her face made it obvious that he had put his hands on her. He'd most likely not get a bond. Even if he did, I wouldn't bother with trying to get him out. Pops wasn't my concern. Ma, on the other hand, had a pretty clean record. Maybe I could talk her into saying that the crack belonged to Pops. My plan was to bond her out and try to talk her into it, but nothing turned out the way I thought it would. Chapter 14. Me, Rob, Mike, Tommy, Hotboi, Mack, and Lorenzo. Narrated by Shandora Warren. The month of August was a complete blur. I spent that time making as much money as I could and trying to prepare for Ma's trial. I was 18, so I was legally old enough to live in the house by myself. Although living is probably putting it loosely. I paid the bills, but that was pretty much it. I didn't cook and I didn't clean. I mean, I didn't have dirty dishes laying around, but I certainly wasn't dusting and such. I lived like an 18-year-old boy. I laid my head there at night, but I was basically out hustling all day. I was in and out of Rob's spot, mostly just to pick up and drop off. But during one of the rare days that I sat at Rob's for a minute, a conversation took place that would change everything. And I mean everything. It was the end of August. I came by to drop some money off with Rob and ended up sitting outside with Hotboi. "Want to smoke?" he asked. Me and Hotboi hadn't really spent a lot of time together since I started driving. Honestly, I kind of missed him. We sat on the back porch and listened to Wu-Tang Clan while we smoked. We laughed and joked about thinking that Ron was sleeping with my mama. You know Rob ain't checking for no old lady, said Hotboi. Eventually, the conversation became serious. Hotboi turned to me. He said, "Can I ask you a question? If it's too much, I'll understand if you don't want to talk about it. But what happened that day when Red Kenny got killed?" I thought about it for a minute before I answered. If it was somebody else, I probably would have said that I didn't want to talk about it. It's not something that I ever cared to say out loud. But being around the group had made me realize something. I felt like Rob and the guys were like a family. Kenny lived at that same house with Rob and Hotboi. They all loved each other. I could imagine that Kenny's death was a huge loss to them too. I hadn't ever thought about how it affected anybody other than Rob. But honestly, they were all tight. I realized that after I saw how they operated. Hotboi had been Kenny's partner in the same way that I was. None of them had gotten any closure. Even though I was unfortunate to have witnessed his murder, I'd had the best day with Kenny. They hadn't had the opportunity to spend the day with him like I had. He was just there one day and gone the next. With that in mind, I decided to share all of the details with Hotboi. I cried. He placed his face into his hands. He cried too. Labor Day rolled around a few days later. Rob had planned a huge barbecue and we had a ball. There was so much food left over that he decided to do it again the next day. It was a Tuesday. I had seen Shalonda earlier in the day. That was her first day back to school. And even though I didn't go back, I stuck to my promise to take her every day. That day was crazy. It was another one of those pick your poison kind of days. If you wanted it, it was there. Drugs, alcohol, and women. I, however, decided to stick to weed. After my birthday the year before, I realized that I wasn't much of a drinker. And after the whole Melanie thing, I decided against the women too. We were around each other all day, the whole crew. Me, Rob, Mike, Tommy, Lorenzo, Mack, and Hotboi. The old heads were telling jokes and lies, as Rob described it. It was just a really good day. And then the party started tapering off. It was early, like 10 o'clock, but we had been going all day. I was tired. It was my plan to go home and to go to sleep, but Rob sent Mike to get me. Family meeting at 10:30, he said. Family meeting was a term that Rob used when we all had to talk about something. It basically meant for us to get down to the basement. The last of the people trickled off, and I started walking towards the meeting spot. I am never gonna forget what happened that night. None of it. I was the last one down there, and I wanted to run as soon as my first foot hit the last step. All I could say was, "Hey, yo, Rob, what's going on?" "Nah, man, I'm out." I turned to walk back towards the door, but Mike grabbed me. "This is non-negotiable, man." He pulled me towards the center of the room and released me. I stumbled into position, joining the rest of the crew. We were all in a semicircle. Me, Rob, Mike, Tommy, Hotboi, and Mack. Lorenzo was tied to a chair. There was a sock jammed in his mouth. I'm never going to forget the way the tears streamed down his face. Everyone else stood completely motionless. Mack, his brother, stood motionless as well. "What's going on?" I asked. Rob walked over to Lorenzo and pulled the sock out of his mouth. "You ready to talk, Lo?" Lorenzo sobbed. "Please don't do this, Rob." Rob stuffed the sock back into Lorenzo's mouth. "He ain't ready to talk," he said. Then without warning, he punched Lorenzo in the stomach. Lorenzo's body sunk inward from the chair, but being tied down, all he could do was gasp for air. Rob paced back and forth in the way that a teacher does when the class is silently taking a test. He stopped directly in front of me. I'll never forget the words that he spoke because they changed everything. He said, I don't think Lorenzo's going to talk, so let me catch you up, man. You got to understand that we've been around here for a long time, so there are things that we all know that you ain't aware of. You remember having a conversation with Hotboi the other day about what happened the day that Kenny got killed? Well, I know you didn't know it, but it turns out that you were sitting on some information. The guy that killed Kenny said, Tony said, what's up? Tony, or Hitman Tony, is a dude that some people around here call when they want people taken care of. So when you told Hotboi that the dude mentioned Tony, he knew that somebody had put a hit out on Kenny. Now, me and Tony go way back, and I couldn't believe that he would touch one of my crew. So, of course, I decided to pay him a visit. And you never guess what he told me. Come to find out, somebody did come to him about putting a hit out on Kenny. It was one of his cousins. He wasn't willing to get involved, so he turned it down. But after doing some digging, he came up with the name of the person who did it. Junie. Me, Mike, and Tommy paid Junie a visit earlier. He ain't doing good. But before he went over the bridge, he gave us some good intel. Come to find out, our boy Lorenzo here went to his cousin Tony to put a hit out on Kenny. When he wouldn't do it, Lorenzo paid that Junie dude to do it. Lorenzo felt like Kenny was moving up too fast, and he thought he was going to take his place. That's it. That's all it took. A little bit of jealousy and $500. Now, I don't know why Junie mentioned Tony. I guess to throw y'all off his trail. But either way, that's what happened. And for that, Lorenzo has to pay. But it ain't just about Kenny. It's about all of us. We are family and we operate as a unit. We can't never trust this nigga again. Rob walked towards Lorenzo. He pulled the sock out of his mouth and asked, "You ready to talk yet, Lo?" Lorenzo, sobbing by that point, looked at me and began to explain. He said, "I'm sorry, little man. I tried to call it off, but he ain't listen. I swear." Rob, who had walked behind Lorenzo, never said a thing. He pulled a plastic bag from his back pocket and forced it over Lorenzo's face. Knowing that it would be burned into my brain, I attempted to turn around, but Hotboi grabbed my arm. I looked at him and he gave me a reassuring nod. It was kind of like his face was saying, "You need to see this." So I turned around. I watched as Rob smothered Lorenzo with a plastic grocery store bag. Lorenzo, who he had treated like a brother for like 10 years, was rocking back and forth and gasping for air. Eventually, he stopped. Rob removed the bag and Lorenzo's head fell back. His eyes and mouth were both wide open. Rob handed the bag to Tommy, who quickly nodded. Rob bowed his head and said, "Rest in peace, Kenny." One by one, the others repeated it. "Rest in peace, Kenny," or "Rest in peace, Red Kenny." Even Mack. And in the strangest turn of events, everything shifted. Everyone stood in a line. One by one, each member of the group walked by to hug Mack and offer their condolences. Even Rob. They all said things like, "I'm sorry, Mackie," or "Sorry that had to happen." No one said the truth. No one said that they were sorry to have witnessed Rob smother the life out of his brother with a plastic bag. When it was my turn, I didn't know what to say. I looked at Mack, partly sad and partly freaking bewildered. We both had tears in our eyes. But when it was time to speak, it was Mack who broke the silence. He said, "I'm sorry for all that, little man." We hugged, and it was like one of those tight church hugs, the ones where both people rock side to side. I guess we were just the only two who could connect in that way in that moment. The situation had taken both of our brothers. And when we were done, Rob simply said, "All right, y'all, meeting adjourned." I was sick when I left that basement, like actually physically sick. I went outside and threw up on the side of the house. When I lifted my head, Hotboi was standing beside me. "You all right?" he asked. I couldn't lie. I wasn't all right. I shook my head. "Nah, I ain't all right." Hotboi very nonchalantly said, "Give it a few days, you'll be okay." But I had a question. A serious question. How Rob know Mack ain't gonna tell it? I mean, that's his brother. Hotboi said, "Did you see what happened in there? Would you tell it?" Look, there are some real clear-cut rules to life around here. We all know them and we all follow them. When the rules don't get followed, things happen. Lorenzo broke the rules, and Mack knows that. I'm going to tell you something, and it don't go no further than here. If it does, it's going to be a problem. I know exactly what happened to my mom, and I know exactly why it happened. I was there. I saw the whole thing. It was Rob. It happened because she broke the rules. This is the first time I've ever said that out loud. You know why? Because I know better. That's between me and you. But long story short, Mack ain't gonna say nothing. Go home and get some rest. You'll be okay. The first one is the hardest. Hotboi walked away and I threw up again. I got into my car, letting everything bounce around in my head. It's true that everybody was kind of sectioned off. Mike and Tommy moved the major drugs. Lorenzo and Mack sold crack and cocaine, but on a smaller scale. When Kenny was alive, he was intended to be a weed boy with Hotboi, but Rob had started to entrust him with more. I understood how that happened because I had started to move up in the same way. Lorenzo paid some guy named Junie to kill Kenny because he felt like Kenny was going to take his place. That thought brought me to two realizations. Kenny had been around for years, so he knew what the rest of the crew knew. I was the only person that was in the dark. Kenny knew that Tony was Mack and Lorenzo's cousin. It's entirely possible that, in his final moments, he heard the name Tony and realized that either Lorenzo or Mack had paid to have him killed. That's so unfortunate because he really loved those guys. I also realized that Lorenzo could easily have done the same thing to me. I was moving up quickly too. I thought a lot about Mack. He watched it all. He watched Rob kill his brother, knowing that there was nothing he could do. In fact, he seemed to take it as a justified thing, like he knew it had to happen. And of course, that brought me to Hotboi. He knew exactly what happened to his mom. She had ceased to exist because she broke the rules, and he saw it all. Things got real messed up at that point. Well, I messed everything up. My mind was in a million places. It was my plan to go smoke a blunt before driving home. But for some reason, I did something completely different. I don't know. I think the sole reason was the universe's grand plan for me to mess my life up. I had some cocaine in the glove compartment, and for the first time, I decided to try it. I don't know why. Scratch that. I do know why. I needed something more. I had just witnessed something that was absolutely insane. I needed to forget. I needed to go further, just for a little while. And once I did, there was no going back. I was higher than those men who went to the moon, allegedly. And in my altered state, my mind changed, all on its own. The plan had been to go home, but suddenly my mind told me to go to Sholanda's house. After everything I'd seen that night, I needed her. I just needed something to be good and normal and right. But when I got there, everything went wrong. I had parked around the corner and walked to Sholanda's house, just like I always did. But when I got to her window, it was locked. Why was her window locked? Sholanda's window wasn't ever locked. I had been going in and out of that window at my leisure all summer, but suddenly it was locked. I later find out that Shalonda wasn't expecting me because she'd assumed that we would go back to our regular school schedule, but I didn't know that at the time. And honestly, I didn't have the capacity to think to that degree. I was so high. And even though I didn't really drink, I'd had a beer on the way there too. The same combination that made me feel invincible had suddenly caused me to become angry and suspicious. A bunch of thoughts crossed my mind. For some reason, I started wondering if Omar had gotten into Sholanda's ear when I was in juvie. They'd probably been hooking up this whole time, and I introduced them by giving him that letter to give her. I thought, and that absolutely infuriated me. I knocked on Sholanda's window. I honestly don't remember all the details, but I do remember the anger. I was so angry. I remember asking why her window was locked and being angry that she was confused about why I was questioning her. In the mind of a hurt, bothered, unstable, and high 18-year-old boy, I felt like I knew what she was doing. I felt like she was doing to me what I had done to her. When Shalonda confronted me about Melanie, I knew I was caught, but I didn't know what to say. My only defense was to act confused. I felt like that's what Shalonda was doing, and it ticked me off. I grabbed Shalonda and pulled her to the bathroom. A part of me just wanted to make sure that nobody was in there. I don't know. I was obsessed with the idea that she had locked the window so she could sleep with somebody else. But after I saw that there was no one in the bathroom, I was still angry. I couldn't turn it off. It was strange because even though I was angry, I still wanted Shalonda. I wanted to touch her. I wanted to feel her. I wanted her to be there for me, but I couldn't say that. I didn't know how to. It wasn't me. My mind wasn't mine. My body didn't even feel like mine. It was like I was looking at it all happening, but I couldn't stop it, like I was somebody else. I pushed Shalonda onto the bathroom floor, and I just took all of my anger and frustration out on her. She did not want to have sex. Not like that. I could tell, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like being on a merry-go-round, one of the ones at the playground. It swirls around really quickly so everything runs together. But every once in a while, you can catch a clear glimpse of something. In a sea of blur, that one thing just stands out for some reason. That's how the whole thing played out. The one thing that I clearly remember is Shalonda's face. Even now, she was so hurt. She was quietly sobbing, and I understood that I had hurt her very deeply. After it hit me, I couldn't take it. I couldn't look at her like that, so I left. I didn't say anything to her. I just left out of the same window that I had crawled in through. I sat behind the wheel of my car and cried. When I say I cried, I really mean that I sobbed. It was one of those really hard cries where you hyperventilate and struggle to catch your breath. I remember saying out loud, "Why did you do that, Ken?" Like I was talking to somebody else. I was so angry. I repeatedly struck the steering wheel with my hands, all the while asking myself why I had chosen to hurt Shalonda, the one good thing in my life. I had a whole conversation with myself that night, and in my now adult mind, I realized that the conversation was an expression of how much hurt was really there. Still sitting in the car around the corner from Shalonda's house, I yelled things like, "My brother is really dead. Kenny is never coming back. My mama was smoking crack. I'm all alone out here. Lorenzo, that's who took my brother away? Lorenzo, who I looked at like a brother. Lorenzo, who my brother looked at like a brother. That nigga? I was moving up. He was probably going to kill me too." Rob smothered Lorenzo with a plastic bag in front of his brother. What did Rob do to Hotboi's mom? How Hotboi see this nigga Rob every day and know that? Hotboi said the first one was the hardest. How many deaths has he seen? I just raped Shalonda. She's never gonna forgive me. It's over. It's all over. Everything's over. She didn't deserve that. She deserves so much more than me. I can't trust nobody. Shalonda can't trust me. I hate my life. I hate everybody. I hate myself. I don't even want to be here no more. I just sat there and cried. And when I got home, I decided that I would break up with Shalonda the next day. She didn't deserve what I had done to her. She didn't deserve the life that I lived. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Please like and follow this podcast, and feel free to share it with your friends, family, and frenemies, because all relationships matter, even the toxic ones. Thanks so much for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.